UAD Console has seen a lot of changes over the last handful of years, including a facelift, new features, and even supporting new interfaces. So this video is going to serve as a one-stop shop, everything you need to know about UAD Console. So if you're just getting started with your Apollo or your Volt, you know what you're doing in the program and how to actually use your device. And if this video helps you out, consider subscribing for all things Universal Audio and Luna. Give the video a like and head to thestevekinney.com for my full Luna Master Course, UAD presets, or to book one-on-one time with me directly to help with your productions. With that said, let's get started and let's deep dive UAD Console. Okay, first, let's answer the question, what even is UAD Console? UAD Console is the software controller for your Apollo or your Volt. And the most important distinction that you should make is that no audio is actually passing through and being processed by the computer application. The application is exclusively just controlling parameters inside of your device. The reason that's really important is because it's simply representing what's happening inside your device, okay? In other words, imagine the year was 2001 and you go to your local Guitar Center or Sam Ash and you say, hey, I wanna buy the latest and greatest device. Well, the Apollo, if it came out back then, would likely be this mixing desk that would have literal faders, but because of the modern miracles of technology, rather than selling you this giant box that has all these faders and it being $10,000, they gave you a rack mountable device where your faders are now just digitally represented on screen. Again, no sound is passed through your computer in this application. It's still just living on your Apollo. This becomes hyper important when you think about signal chain and signal flow, and when you try to problem solve how to get your Apollo to work with Zoom. It also kind of becomes really important when you think about collaborating with people on the internet, and why when you try to do a live tracking session with someone and you use a plugin like Listen To, it explains why that's kind of a challenge from a technical standpoint. Because again, all of your processing is living on the device and it's not really living inside of your computer's domain, meaning if you use programs like Logic, Pro Tools, Studio One, etc., you have to software monitor so you hear what they hear. And yeah, that's a whole nother topic in and of itself. I don't want to confuse you too much. But Universal Audio, if you're listening right now, I would love to see a Listen To DSP accelerated plugin, please. That would be amazing. Thank you. Next, let's talk about the coolest feature of UAD Console, in my opinion, and that is its direct control and integration into Luna. Now, I'm going to be just briefly touching on this because this is not a Luna focused video. This is a UAD Console focused video, but check this out. I've got Console here. And if I go into Luna, let me pull up a track here. I've got my acoustic guitar track and it's set up to be on line 5. But if I set it to mic line 3, you can see that parts of UAD Console start to appear. Okay, and if I turn input monitoring on, you can see that now my unison slot comes up, my record effects slots come up. I can control the gain on the preamp. And that is really cool. It's all kind of built in line into Luna. But that does pose the question, is there a reason you need to be in console if you use Luna? And there could be. There is a mode called console tracking mode, which serves a real purpose. And it functions slightly differently than Luna tracking mode. If you want to dive deeper into that, again, check out the Luna Master Course. There's full demonstrations and walkthroughs, guided access just like this. All right, next, let's talk about the on-screen interface and like what you're looking at, because there's certainly a lot here. And if this is your first time, this could be a bit overwhelming, but it doesn't actually have to be that complicated. So first, across the top, you have your title bar, and this is really important because if you have an Apollo and a Volt, like I do, this is how you're gonna be able to swap between the two devices and the control of each device. Moving on down to the bottom, we have our info bar, and this is gonna have some session-specific information, potentially, especially if you're a Luna user, so you're gonna find info about your tempo. Now, if you're using something like Logic, you're gonna have to type in your tempo manually if you want to have like time-based effects sync up while you're monitoring. More on that later. Of course, you've got your sample rate and your clock, and then the info on your DSP usage. Getting into the meat and potatoes of UAD Console, over on the left-hand side, you have your plugin browser. Just to the right of that, you have your navigation bar. Just to the right of the console navigation menus, you have this little options menu, and its pretty much sole function is to expand and collapse the different segments of the mixer, as well as make your plugin windows bigger or smaller, etc. Same with the aux sends. You can expand them out into faders, right? So that's pretty much this entire little strip's job here. You have a meter bridge across the top, so you can see your input level. That's a nice little visual cue. And then of course you have all of the channels and the control for the channels. Now we're gonna hold on that and get back to that in a minute. Jumping all the way over to the right here, you have a few collapsible parameters here. You have your aux channels to start out, and then you also have a talkback channel here, both of which you can hide. So first we'll hide the auxiliary channel. Okay, you can see that coming in and out. And then you have your control room that you can hide. And both of these can be toggled in any manner. So if you just want the talkback control room to be visible, you can just show that. And same thing with the aux channels. And that is directly accessible right here underneath the big meter, which if you click the big meter, you can also have that be an expandable big meter that is a floating window. So if you have two screens, you might be able to just have that chilling on your screen. It's actually really cool. Directly below the auxiliary and control room features, you have the Q outputs matrix. Now, I'm not sure if they actually call it the Q outputs matrix. That's just what I'm calling it. I think they just call it the Q outputs menu, but I digress. This is where you can set up the routing for your Q outputs. Again, we'll get to Qs here in a moment, but I just wanted to point that out really quickly. Now, just below the Q outputs, you have your monitor controller, and with this section, you have the ability to load a calibration profile, which is provided by SonarWorks. And of course, with that, you'd have to have a license of SonarWorks and the little mic, and you got to do this whole little mini game where you go around your room and you measure, etc. But ultimately, it's amazing that it's integrated into the Apollo, because that means you can listen with no latency still while having this perfectly calibrated profile, which is great. And this is where you go to manage that. Below that, you have your headphone monitor correction, which is really nice. You have headphones 1 and 2. This is also a pop-out menu. And then below that, you have your monitor in-out bypass for your calibration profile. And it takes you right back to the monitor controller, which is a bit redundant, but hey, it's just a quick way of bypassing this, which is really nice. You can turn it in and out. Finally, and lastly, you have your output mono selector and mute selector. And then of course you have your monitor volume control handy on screen as well. Because again, you could just grab your monitor button on your Apollo and turn it down there, but it's possible that that's sitting in a rack off to the side. So again, having digital control is really, really nice. And it's one of the great features of the Apollo. At the very, very bottom here, you'll see the scribble strip at the bottom. This does nothing for anything in the system. This is purely for your eyes to stay organized within this particular app, UAD Console. So I could go into this channel and rename it. I could call this whatever is coming down the line. So at one point I had a vocal there. This could be an SM57. This could be, whatever you need it to be. Think of this like a literal scribble strip across the console. You'd walk in, they had the tape across the desk, and it, was penciled in on a marker or a pen, and you could rip that off the console. That's kind of what they're doing here for you. But there is a hidden function here, and it is the stereo link. So I can link channels 7 and 8. And notice when you do that, it does rename to analog 7 and 8. But again, that's a very, very important function. And then graphically speaking, the only other thing that changes about that is that instead of one pan knob, now you have two. So you could also change your monitoring that way. And then also notice in your aux sends, even your cues, that the pan knob disappears because, well, you're getting a stereo left and right. It is stereo linked. And that's where you'll find that function. Now, the last thing to talk about on screen here is really this center section, and you're kind of divided really into two parts. You've got the main center section, and then you've got these faders at the bottom. This top center section is scrollable. Now, if you didn't want to scroll as much, you can collapse everything, and to do that, That's where these little menus and this little option menu becomes really important. You can see here that my plugin window is like a box that shows the plugin GUI, like a little icon, right? I can minimize that by checking this box, and now it just shows the name. And everything got a little smaller. I can do that down here. I can do that in the sends area as well if I want to change them to just a tiny little knob versus a fader. And I can do that for everything in this sends tab. Additionally, I can expand or collapse just segments of this mixer, or I can collapse everything all at once right here in this navigation menu. I can also open it, I can make everything large, or I can make everything small all at once. I can also enable fixed slots, which means that it's gonna show me every single console slot that I have available to me for each channel. Now, you might be asking, why do I have 8 plugin slots, plugin insert slots in my console? Well, that's because I have Luna open currently. And that's a bit of a quirk. If you don't have Luna open, it's only gonna show you 4 plugin slots. And those 4 actually are really tied to this UAD Rec versus UAD monitor, which we're gonna get into in a little bit. The final graphical user interface modification that you can make is the sends overview selection. So if I select this, now instead of having individual parameters that I can scroll through the mixer, the sends and the auxiliary sends become this little popover menu, which could be really handy if you like it. I mean, it's really just a personal preference at this point, if you prefer to see everything all at once, or if you want it to be minimized and collapsed down into like a pop-out box. Me personally, I actually really enjoy both views. You can see on screen here that if you have a signal going somewhere, this view does a really, really good job at showing what channels are actually sending some sort of a signal somewhere. So it's a really good way to see everything at a glance. In this view, it's really, really handy for making changes to the parameters on the fly at a glance. Now, while we're on the subject of the mixer navigation, let's just finish the job and talk about everything else that's right here. Right at the top is where you can save and load scenes or sessions, as they call them, right? So if you have a particular tracking setup that you do quite frequently, maybe it's guitars or maybe it's vocal tracking. Vocal tracking is a great example for this, you know, because you'd have your whole chain kind of going down here, and you probably have some effects in the auxiliary slots. Well, you can recall all of that all at once by creating and saving sessions. So if you want to save this as a session, I can click Save As, and now I can call this one video production. I do this all the time, so I'll hit Save As, and there you go. Below that, you have your mixer rows represented here, and these can be hidden as well. So if you didn't want to look at them, like for example, if I don't want to see my faders, I can turn the faders off and just look at these options. If I didn't want to see the input section, I can hide that entirely. Now, the reason I say this is because there are times that people have reached out to me and they've said, hey, I don't have my preamp section, where to go? Well, this is how you can get yourself into trouble, is by accidentally clicking on that and hiding it. So again, to get it back, just click right there and it comes back, okay? Me personally, I like to just leave all of this up. I don't like to hide anything because again, you can get yourself into trouble that way. We've already kind of looked at this, but jumping down just below it, we have 2 really key parameters here and functions. So if you're a Logic user or a Pro Tools user or anything other than a Luna user, these 2 buttons become all important, and you also have a per channel version of what this parameter does. So let me explain. If you have your Apollo in UAD Rec mode, that means any plugin in this chain is being committed to wave while you're recording. If you have it in UAD Monitor, that means that the plugins in the insert slots are not being committed. You're only listening to them as you perform. Most people like this quite a bit because it means you can have your vibe or your sauce and you don't have to worry about that being baked into your wave recording. So if you overcompressed your vocal, no big deal, because what went to wave is just the clean preamplified signal. Now, this is the global selector for this function. So you can see as I am toggling this that it's changing across every channel. If you wanted to do it on a per channel basis, that's cool. You can do that. And there's a visual cue for that. Both of them are now yellow. Below that, you have your modifiers. What do these do? Well, if I click on remove, it allows me to quickly remove plugins in this whole entire chain. So let's load up a few things here. Let's just choose an 1176. Cool. Let's say I want to take this 1176 and put it across a bunch of channels. Well, I have the copy function for that. I can click on something, and now once I click on it, I can click and drag, and I can load that plugin across everything. Press the escape key to escape out of that view. Now I want to remove a bunch of plugins at once. I can click and drag. Again, escape. Power modifiers work the exact same way, so I can power stuff off by clicking and dragging. Really handy. Just below that, there's a really key feature here, and it's extremely important, okay? This one's called isolate. What does that do? The isolate function is gonna make it so that nothing is changing about that channel as you recall or change parameters or change sessions, etc. Now, why is this important? Well, okay, so I use Luna all the time, and obviously if you load up Luna, Luna's gonna kind of take over console. And you know, when I'm doing these YouTube demonstrations, I'm talking through UAD Console. I don't want that to change. I don't want my cue to change because that's how the audio gets out of my system into my video setup. So I throw this channel into isolate mode, and it prevents changes from happening essentially on this channel. So that's what that does. Just below that, we have the ability to hide the browser really quickly. But there's a faster way to do that. It's called the backtick key. If you press that, you can toggle it in and out really quickly. Next, plugin scenes. Now, I just want to point out and call out that you have plugin scenes as a capability, which is really going to come in handy for the live production environment. But I do want to just call out that it's there. And finally, you have the ability to open up the settings page, and the settings is a pop-out menu, okay? If we close that menu, you can also come up here to the top and find settings this way as well. It's the same menu, so I usually just click there because that's a lot easier to get to. There's also a shortcut for this too. It's the Command comma key. So you can see I'm toggling that in and out. So let's go ahead and talk about the settings while we're here. You have 5 tabs across the top. You have hardware related settings, IO matrix, which really should have its own class, the options page, which is pretty simple, MIDI, and network. Now, for most of us, network is something you're never gonna interact with. Again, this network thing is more for the live production environment, so I'm gonna kind of ignore it for now. MIDI can be very useful. I'm not gonna dive too much into MIDI either, but MIDI can be useful because you can also control things like the scene changes, etc. Again, it's more useful for the live production environment. So if you use Ableton, you can send MIDI messages out, change scenes, change autotune settings, etc. In the options page, so I'll just show you this real quick. So right now my metering is post fader. So what that means is as I pull my fader down, now my metering is being reflected post fader, okay? If I change it to pre fader, now you're seeing the input level and the metering remains constant no matter where the fader position is. I can even gain it way up and no big deal. When would you use pre-fader? Well, I like to use pre-fader metering while I'm actually getting the initial like signal level on the pre. But soon after that, once I know that my level itself is pretty good, I'll go into post-fader mode, and that can be pretty helpful in general as you build out the rest of the chain. Additionally, you have options for your control mode, and you have clip hold or peak hold. I like to have my clip hold infinite because if I clip, I want to know that I clipped at some point. We're gonna come back to IO Matrix here shortly, so let's jump to the hardware tab and talk about that. In here, you're gonna find your device type. So if you have a Volt connected, you can also change the parameters around the Volt. I'm gonna go back to the Apollo here. This is where you're gonna go to change your output reference levels. It's also where you can bypass the input gain stage entirely for your analog line ins. It's where you can assign your talkback function or your switch, etc., Q bus counts, etc., right? This is where you're gonna find hardware related settings. Now, I'd love to talk about IO Matrix. I almost feel like it deserves its own video, but I'm gonna save IO Matrix for the end of this video because it is dense. And we've already been through quite a dense video in the first place. So I appreciate you hanging out with me thus far. Let's continue and actually talk about the functions of console itself in the center section where you're likely going to be interacting with it all the time. All right, so first, signal flow. How does the signal actually flow through console? Well, of course, let's just assume we have a mic plugged in here. Well, we can even take mine, for example. Okay, my mic is plugged in. Let me turn off my speakers so there's no feedback. So my mic is plugged into the interface on channel 1 or analog 1, okay? And the first thing that it really hits is this unison slot, okay? And everything flows top down. So my signal goes from unison and the pre itself. That's where you have your pad, your 48 volts. The very next thing that happens is it goes through the insert chain. From there, it either goes two places. If I have this on UAD monitor mode, well, okay, the monitor chain kind of continues down all of these sections here. It goes through the aux 1, aux 2, the cues, and it hits the output path, okay? And the fader kind of correlates to that as well. That's really where the fader lives, is at the output stage. The second path out of this goes directly to the DAW. And because it's on UAD monitor, you kind of almost want to think of this like pre-inserts, okay? So the only thing that goes to my DAW or to the wave at that point is this unison analog 1 preamp section. Everything post this preamp section is just purely for monitoring. If I throw it into UAD rec mode, now I'm just adding the insert section to that chain and to that feed going into my DAW. Okay, real quick, looking at the preamp section, obviously this is where you're gonna load your mic pre emulations, like the unison plugins like the API or the Neve or some of the guitar amps. But you also have a whole lot more in the way of controls for your preamps. You can switch them over to line mode. While in mic mode, you also have the ability to turn on the high pass filter, the pad, or 48 volts, or flip the polarity of your mic source. And for your hardware line ins, you also have the ability to change the reference level right here, all in line within UAD Console. Real quick, I did want to call out auto gain. So auto gain is a really cool feature for Gen 2 Apollos and the Volt 876. And when you click it, it's incredibly easy to use. Essentially, you're just going to set your duration, and when you click start, you're going to perform in front of the mic or with your guitar, etc. And the system's going to listen for 15 seconds and automatically apply a gain change to your signal source, either while you're listening to the performance or after listening to the performance. Personally, I prefer to use after listening because I don't hear any weird gain changing that might throw me off. I kind of just do my performance and then it sets the gain afterwards. It's super easy. I don't really feel like there's a demonstration that I really need to do here. It's pretty self-explanatory. You're gonna perform in front of the mic and it's gonna change the gain for you. It's a really handy feature. It's self-explanatory and it's pretty simple to set up. Just follow the on-screen prompt. Now, I would assume that loading a plugin is really self-explanatory. Obviously, you're gonna click on a slot, you can scroll and you can click, like I wanna load a distressor, great. If I didn't have a slot selected, I can also click and drag and drop. That's another way that you can load a plugin. To remove a plugin, you can click and drag anywhere outside of the insert tab. Okay, if I just drag around on the insert slots, it's just gonna change the position of the plugin. But if I wanna remove it entirely quickly, I can click and drag and throw it away. I could also right click and choose remove or assign if I wanted to change the plugin. But again, to get rid of it, click and drag. That's a really fast way of doing it. Now, while we're on the subject of loading plugins, let's talk about loading a preset and saving presets. To load a preset, it's incredibly easy if you're using this browser on the left. All you really do is go to the preset section and find a preset. I've got a couple here that I made, and you can click and drag onto a channel. That's a super easy way to load your presets, incredibly easy. Alternatively, you could right click on any insert slot and choose presets, and that's gonna take you to the same menu, but this time you're gonna get a visual cue where all of your plugin inserts turn blue, at which point you can just click on a preset. A lesser known fact is just to the left of the word inserts, you can click the plus icon, and this is gonna do the same function. Now that's how you can load channel presets, but let's talk about how you can save channel presets. So let's just say I don't like that one, I don't like that one, but I like this chain. What I can do is open up that same menu. Again, I'm clicking just to the left of the word inserts. And now with this menu open, I can click save, and I can either overwrite this name or I can give it a new name. So I'm gonna call this one new preset example, and I'll click save as. And you can see at the bottom of the list here, it shows up, new preset example, and we're good. And of course, within the plugin windows themselves, they also have presets that you can save on a per plugin basis. So all you do there is, you find your setting and click save. It's the same prompt, it's the same menu, just specific to plugins. Okay, next let's talk about the sends section here. So you have your auxiliaries, you have your cues, and how do these work? Well, for one, let's go ahead and just expand this. And while we're at it, we're gonna open up our auxiliary section here. Now, in order to hear this, okay, you guys are listening on Q1. So if I throw an effect on over here, you're not actually gonna hear it, okay? Because I'm not sending any of auxiliary 1 to the Q mix for Q1. So I'm just gonna throw on something like the lexicon, just so you guys hear that. Now, I don't actually even know what this sounds like because I have my monitors muted and I would get feedback from the mic. So we're kind of operating blind here, but I'm gonna go ahead and option click here on this parameter. And you can see that that sends a 100% unity gain. And now all we need to actually do is send some signal to it. So I'm gonna take aux 1 here, and I'm going to start riding the level up. And now you should hear at this point some sort of reverb on my voice, and it probably sounds absolutely ludicrous, but that's how you do it, right? You don't really wanna load a reverb on the channel itself because then you'd be doing all sorts of weird gain staging with the reverb plugin wet dry mix. That would be a bit funky. What you really want to do is load the reverb over on the aux channel and send some of your signal to aux 1. So that's how you do that. You have 2 aux channels, so you can load 2 different time-based or spatial effects there, and you can send your signal to 2 different places, etc. Now you can see that there's signal over here as well. Again, you're not hearing this because I am not sending any the moment that I do. Now it might sound a little bit phasey and a little bit funky. So I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that as well. And we're gonna get rid of the signal there too. One final note and one final thing to be cognizant of with aux channels is whether you're in pre or post fader mode. That's gonna heavily determine whether you're sending a whole bunch of signal to it or no signal at all, depending on where your fader is down in this bottom mixer. So if this is the first time you've ever heard of the term pre-fader or post-fader, you're gonna get a crash course here. So we've got our lexicon set up here and it's in pre-fader mode. I'm gonna switch it to post-fader mode and notice a few things. One, notice that my fader here is all the way down. And of course, if I had this in post fader and I had this plugin on and I go to send signal over to it, which we can clearly see that I'm doing, I'm sending signal. Okay, no signal is being sent. What is going on here, right? Well, because this aux is set to post fader and my fader down here is at 0, infinity, it's not able to receive signal. Another way to think of it is I'm sending unity gain of nothing. So the aux is not gonna get anything until I actually start to raise this channel fader. As I do, now you can start to see and hear that signal is coming back. And again, it sounds ludicrous because this is a YouTube video. I don't need reverb for demonstration, but here we are. But now it's working as intended. And if I were to mute this channel, okay, well, again, this is receiving the signal after my fader choices on this channel. So again, I'm sending 100% of whatever this fader and this channel is doing after the fader move has been made. So if we throw it into pre-fader mode, now the signal comes back, and it doesn't really matter what I do because this channel is completely in pre-fader. In other words, I'm sending 100% unity gain of this signal before any of these fader moves. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off now. The way that this whole pre-fader function works is very similar to the way that your DAW receives the signal from the Apollo, okay? Remember, it takes the signal directly from the pre and or immediately after the inserts. So it's certainly pre-fader. And safe to say, for a lot of situations, most of the time, if you're using reverb effects on an aux channel, you're also probably gonna wanna be in pre-fader mode. Just a pro tip. Now, we're gonna talk about Q mixes real quick, okay? We already know that I'm living on Q1, and that's how you guys are hearing me. But if you wanted a completely separate headphone mix, okay, you can see that these Q2 and Q3, they're grayed out. I can send signal to it, but it doesn't really matter because they're not really on, okay? To turn them on, they have to have a color, right? Well, you can't just turn them on. You have to go into this Q outputs menu and then assign them to not follow the mix. The mix is comprised of these faders at the bottom of UAD Console, plus whatever's coming out of your master fader in your DAW. Let me get rid of myself down at the bottom there. Now in the Luna Master Course, I kind of covered this concept in depth, but your Apollo is basically letting you monitor your live signal directly from the device in addition to playback audio that's coming from your DAW. So again, it's basically like a literal mixer. Remember the analogy at the very, very top of the video. In the early 2000s, this would have been a physical mixer sitting on your desk, and then the computer is separate, and there's two sources of audio at once. You've got playback audio, you've got the live mixer audio. It's really what's happening with the Apollo, essentially. And so again, the mix is comprised of these faders at the bottom, plus whatever is being played back through your DAW. Now, if I wanted to build a custom Q mix, how could I do that? Well, first, again, you have to deselect your Q to follow the mix. Now it's following its own custom mix, which currently has nothing assigned to it. If Q3 wanted some signal level of my vocal or my voice here, I can ride that up and I can start to build out its own mix. Additionally, if you're one of those people that have those external devices like the Behringer P16s or those little personal Q mix devices, you can mirror out these headphone cues via line outs or via ADATs. And this is where you'd go to do that. You just say, hey, look, I want this to be mirrored to line 7, 8. All right, moving on and scrolling down here, another thing that you can do as far as routing is mirroring the output of individual channels. So again, in the situation of sending your signal to the personal mixer boxes, you can directly send any of your channels out to mirror out one of the line outs or the ADAT out. And you also, at the very, very bottom here, you have the ability to either mirror it to the monitor or just leave it strictly going out of the Apollo. If you have mirror to the monitor on, that means that you're still going to be able to control the feed going to your monitor left and right through the use of this mixer down at the bottom. And finally, because we're talking about the mixer at the bottom, let's talk about the faders and how they interact with your signal. So oftentimes people will ask me in an email or they'll ask me in a one-on-one, does it matter if I push this fader up or down while I'm recording? And the short answer is no. These faders down here, the pan knobs, the mute, solo, etc., this is exclusively for the monitor mix going out of the left and right monitors. The thing is that if you recall earlier in the video, the actual location of where the DAW receives your signal is way up here. Your signal's receiving your signal either at the preamp section when in UAD monitor mode, or again, it's receiving your signal post the inserts. That's before the sends. That would be before the auxes, before the cues, and certainly before the output, and definitely before the fader. So long story short, the faders really have nothing to do with the signal level going into your DAW. Now, all of this becomes really important to understand because when you deal with software monitoring in things like Logic or Studio One or Pro Tools, that means you need to monitor your signal when it lives inside of the DAW, okay? So in that situation, you're probably going to want to mute your signal. And what you're going to want to do is go to this console mixer and actually mute your channel here or pull the fader down. You don't want to hear what's coming directly from the Apollo. You want to hear the actual signal being processed by your DAW's internal engine. So just keep that in mind. That's a really good reason why you'd probably be here in console if you're only utilizing software monitoring in your DAW. Additionally, if you're doing things like outboard gear and you're doing hardware inserts in Pro Tools or in Logic, right? The moment that you have that hardware insert in your path, there's a chance that you could also hear that through the Apollo, through its own built-in monitoring, and you're probably going to want to go to console, mute all of those channels, and then let the compensated, delay compensated plugin manage the monitoring through the DAW. So yeah, just food for thought. Okay, next, let's talk about the control room section inside of UAD Console. Now again, this is a small little pop-out menu system that kind of just pops up off to the side here. And it does get you access to the talkback function. So again, if you couldn't reach for the talkback button on your Apollo, you could always click right there, and now you can hear the talkback. And you also have the option to route it to the auxiliary channels. You can route it to specific cues, or you can just say, hey, go to the monitor, okay? You can also add more plugins to it as well. If the talkback function itself is not that strong of a signal, you can boost it with pre's, or you can add more compression or EQ. Some people use it as a extra mic in their drum room because you can certainly record this. This is another input source in IO Matrix, which again, we're going to look at later. Another interesting and important noteworthy aspect of the control room is this source section, okay? So by default, your source for your control room is your monitor. And what that means is your left and right monitors, right? But sometimes it might be helpful for you to actually listen in on one of those headphone cues because someone might be in the booth or in another room, wherever your recording setup is, and you're just not sure. They're saying something's wrong with their headphone mix. You have no idea what they're hearing. Well, this little source section allows you to turn on the cue as the source for your monitor left and right. So if you're sitting in the control room, now you can actually listen in to your cues. This is an extremely powerful tool for whenever you're in the situation of working with a number of musicians at the same time. Just remember to change your cue source back to monitor before jumping out of this menu. Okay, next let's talk about the behemoth that is IO Matrix and its whole point and what it actually does. So IO Matrix is a bit overwhelming if you've never seen anything like this before, and the terminology and all the columns, you're probably like, what the heck am I looking at? Well, it's really, really simple. So the channel number is what your computer sees, and that is the quite literal Thunderbolt interface, okay? The interface portion, if you go read the block diagram of what these Apollos are, the Thunderbolt interface is a pathway of digital channels. And inside of the engine on this Apollo, or inside of the circuitry on the Apollo, however you want to think of it, you can tell analog channels to align to the digital channel pathways. So if you want to think of these numbers as digital channel pathways, we can align any one of these physical sources and physical destinations to match up with one of these digital channels. Now, what that means for your DAW, like Logic or Pro Tools, right? Pro Tools just sees the channel 1. And yeah, sure, maybe it also can pull the name and that information pops up too. But really what's important here is the number, because, odds are you're going to go into Logic and it's going to say choose input 1, right? Well, what is input 1? Well, input 1 currently is mic line high Z1, which is an analog source on the Apollo. But I can go right here and I can tell channel 1 to be anything on my Apollo. I can actually tell it to be the talkback if I wanted to. So it's really extremely flexible, and it's important to know that you can actually go in here and change it. But I digress. I just kind of wanted to make sure that you understood what this actually is and try to demystify the fact that it's not actually really that complicated. You're literally just going in here and aligning sources to digital channels. Now, a final thought before we wrap this video: if you've enjoyed this presentation style, the way that I've educated you on UAD Console, this is the exact format that I use in my official Luna Master Course. Now, one of the things that makes the Master Course unique is the fact that it's going to be continuously updated and it's going to continuously evolve as Luna evolves. And one of the hardest things about making this UAD Console video is that YouTube doesn't allow me to go back and edit videos. So I can't go back to the video that has a ton of views and traction and fix things about that video. I have to make an all new video, which is really what led me to making the Luna Master Course in the first place. I can change those videos and you have a dedicated spot to always stay up to date, as well as having access to both my SSL and my Stream Deck templates, so you can learn with the tools that I use right alongside me. To learn more, go to thestevekinney.com where you can find all of the ways that I can help with your productions. I appreciate you guys watching. I'll see you in another video. Cheers.